Yeah, maybe a few words about me. So I've come a little bit more from the traditional art world. Discovered CryptoArt in 18. Started minting as one of the first artists on super rare unknown origin. I wrote a position paper on CryptoArt in 2019, which got published in 19, and this year it got published in the Leonardo Journal. It's kind of like a definition of CryptoArt. And yeah, I've been documenting the history of CryptoArt since a few years, just to kind of, contextualize where is CryptoArt and how does it touch on with the traditional art world. I work mostly with clouds as a symbol, because it's like a good symbol for blockchain technology. It's in constant transformation. It's intangible values, and it's basically a manifestation, right? It's the blockchain itself. It's maintained by thousands of computers, but if people would stop believing in the blockchain as a concept, it could also just disappear again if they would start unplugging their computers. So yeah, that's a bit on me. If nobody has questions, I can show you what I wanted to show you today. I kind of wanted to give you a quick overview of like where does it come from, how basically it started with Bitcoin blockchain art, like kind of the themes, how it kind of shifted the paradigm, where we are today, and that there's a little bit of a clash of cultures between like older crypto artists and basically people starting in 2021, and then basically show you a little definition model to kind of know, to better distinguish the different elements of crypto art. So yeah, and Nicole, I don't know if you want to do questions at the end or in between, but
yeah, I mean, usually I keep my eyes on the text channel. So if there's anything that anybody has wants to add or comment, like we usually text there, and then yeah, we can leave time for questions at the end. Would be great.
Okay, so you'll maintain that because I don't see it. I'm just seeing the presentation.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's start a little bit with an introduction. So as I mentioned, I started fairly early, wrote a little bit about it, and in 2021 we saw like a huge growth in the space, and people kind of started using NFTs and crypto arts anonymously. And as you know, as somebody who was in the space a little bit longer, it kind of bothered me because it kind of swept under the table a whole area of art which was created for it and is basically not considered at all anymore. So it motivated me to kind of create this introduction, which I'm presenting you today, and which will end up like in a longer post to be kind of like a general introduction, to people new in this space, and still kind of introduce them to core concepts and facilitate the differentiation. So yeah, with that said, we saw that there was a huge growth in 2021. It kind of shows a little bit here in this chart, unprecedented, despite all. This whole movement goes basically back to the 2014s. Was present on different chains. It was Bitcoin, it was Namecoin, but really it was at the upcoming of Ethereum and the first Ethereum marketplaces where it was kind of like a focus on fine art. And with that came the growth, which kind of also was carried then by collectibles and games. If we take a step back and take a look, okay, where did it start and how did it start? I think one area which is important to mention is, it came all basically, the whole Bitcoin movement itself came from the Cipher punk movement, which was basically a group of programmers which kind of was very, very keen on, keeping privacy online, keeping ideas of liberty, of decentralization and other elements. And out of this group, basically, Bitcoin was presented to this group, and they were kind of the first to carry this idea into the public and carry it on. And I think it's kind of important to know that it came from this direction, because a lot of values, are still embedded. The ideas of, artists become self-governed, and the right of privacy, and the idea to, do not recreate the existing structures, but trying to looking for more just or more fair alternatives to the current system. They all, I find, there's a high overlap with the values of the cypherpunk movement, but it's kind of forgotten in these modern days. If we go then a little bit further, to understand it, when it came to the first years of Bitcoin, it was basically, a couple of tech guys and girls, discussing digital values in a currency in mailing lists, chat rooms, meetups, but it was all very abstract. And it kind of became important to create some sort of physicality and identity in this movement. So we saw early on, the idea of embedding basically crypto some sort of physically. And in the beginning, it was mostly done with coins. They became so popular, that there was even books published, because I believe around 2017 there was already 60 manufacturers of these coins, which just showed how people wanted to embrace something, because everything was virtual, everything was intangible. So there was some sort of need to embed the physicality. And another element which came a little bit later was the famous or infamous Silicon Road history, where it was a Bitcoin-based online shop which offered pretty much everything you can imagine, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that led basically to many people dismissing Bitcoin, right, as something which is illegal, as something which is for drug addicts or criminals. And out of this, they came the call for some sort of identity, because suddenly people were just hanging on to the negative sides, but really dismissing the whole potential of the technology behind it, the alternative. And the early people in crypto were kind of forced to stick together, because nobody was really interested in that. So what happened naturally is that the art kind of mimetically started to document what was happening in the space. And I think one of the interesting example was, the mysterious creator of the Bitcoin, which nobody knows who it is, and that was Satoshi Nakamoto. And as it progressed, the depiction of him were all kind of anonymous. The Guy Fawkes masks came up. But as then Newsweek, I believe it was somewhere around 2014, kind of identified a man called Dorian Nakamoto, and he became kind of the symbol. And even though, it was later on clear that he was not the creator of it, he was nevertheless an iconic person, because the movement was looking for an identity, looking for somebody, even if it was not the right one. It kind of wanted to be some sort of visualized. And memes became a very, very strong element in the early days of Bitcoin art or crypto art, because they were kind of depicting what was happening along the way, when there was huge breaches in exchanges. So there was elements of art which kind of depicted that and played with these themes, which is something which continues until today. So aside from the memes, there was also the idea of kind of activism, using basically art to promote, what it is all about, why should people know about it. And one interesting example was, for instance, Christian Langalis, He's actually more known around the world as the Bitcoin sign guy, when he held up this Buy Bitcoin sign at the Capitol Hill live stream, and basically, could be seen as some sort of performance art. There's other artists which kind of continued that. There's, for instance, Juan, this Lucho Poletti. He's a Mexican artist who does a lot of kind of artwork which is based on propaganda, and is using basically, traditional propaganda techniques in posters and stickers and so on, but use it actually to promote Bitcoin as, an alternative to people. And another interesting artist is Graffiti, who, made, like, for instance, here on the right, you can see it. He made like billboards and bought these billboards or rented these billboards all in places where the Federal Reserve is in the United States, in working class neighborhoods, to really educate people, about an alternative, about money, and what it is all about. And, after these more like physical and conceptual pieces, we started then with tokenizing digital art. And that was something which was a paradigm shift. We had historically always the problem of digital art that, in order for people to look at it or consider it, it had to be in a physical medium. So it had to be like either a DVD or CD, to limit the distribution. So with the idea of tokenizing digital art, it really created like this paradigm shift. The medium could remain natively digital, and by being digital, it was possible to create basically online marketplaces and create collectibles and create like a whole community around it, which ended up where we are today. Here are a couple of examples. It was the Rare Pepes, or like, Dada, which was one of the first marketplaces which actually was innovative in that regard, that they implemented already secondary sales royalties for artists, which is like a huge game changer, and something which I kind of find it important to talk about with new artists in the spaces. A lot of artists fought hard that this new crypto art system is kind of sustainable for artists, because in the art world, a lot of people are making money, but rarely the artists. So with the secondary royalties, artists basically approached marketplaces with the support of collectors to kind of implement a standard secondary royalty fee. So that means when an artwork sells a second time from a collector to another collector, that you as an artist are still getting a share of that, which is something which is established in hardly any country. It's very hard to establish, but with the help of the technology, it is kind of possible. And I think it's something important to consider if you're, after this residency, looking at marketplaces. This should be something which is very, very high in your priority, because as the space is growing, more and more marketplaces are coming up. But there are unfortunately many which don't even think about artist royalties or don't even have them. So it's something important just to consider as an artist, that you make sure that you have, that you take care of yourself for the future. So that leads me to in where we are today. It's kind of a little bit of a clash of cultures, because you have kind of like artists which are in the space already since many years, which, went through a lot of struggle. People in crypto for the longest time were kind of like outsiders. People were laughing at them. They got scammed. They lost a lot of money. They lost their private keys. They lost fortunes. So they went through a lot of hardship, and crypto art was something which united them. So a lot of people, when they think crypto art, for them it's linked to the theme. It's not necessarily linked to the token or NFTs itself. And that's why, there's like a little bit of a clash where the crypto artists try to differentiate themselves from this new wave of creators, which started basically in 2021 and is more focused on the creative part and is using NFTs as a medium. But to kind of sum it up, So Bitcoin blockchain art, initially was mostly physical. It was some sort of expression of this whole hardship, ridicule, and the loss. It kind of, promoted the technology. It promoted the ideas of decentralization, of propaganda, but it also had embedded the values of decentralization. And I think as this space was growing, and it was growing very fast, these are like elements and values which are not necessarily promoted to the extent they should be. So when we started looking at definitions, what is crypto art and where does it come from, you'll see that most of the definitions and kind of writings really arise around the 17 and 18 range, where we see a lot of collectibles and art marketplaces on Ethereum, because despite a lot of projects existing much longer, it was really the rise in Ethereum projects and art marketplaces where it really started to gain some sort of traction and interest beyond necessarily the niche of the crypto places. So out of this, a lot of definitions are basically linked directly to Ethereum tokens, are linked to the Ethereum chain, while, they do not necessarily consider, to the extent they should, the existing crypto art and even NFT art, which existed before. So that kind of motivated me to create like a little definition model, which I'll show you here. It shows you basically that crypto art itself, an element of it is NFT, but there are also NFTs which are not part of crypto art. And I'm going to give you just a couple of examples to make it clear. Let's say, you have like in number one here, NFT art. These are like tokenized artworks, which are like linked to an NFT and could or could not necessarily relate to blockchain themes or elements. Then there's like a whole element of NFTs which are not crypto art. For example, there's like these ENNs domains, which are basically kind of like a service which can replace a wallet address with something more readable. Or there is the whole area of like, the metaverse, where you can have, for instance, a land or a property in a metaverse, and that would be an NFT as well. But that itself would not be considered crypto art, because it's just NFT as like a digital vessel, but it's not artistic in any way. And then there is, number three here, there is crypto art, which is, strongly related. It's digital, but it's not an NFT. And just to give you an example, there was Ria Meyer, for instance, created artwork which were based on smart contracts. This kind of contract was you could basically trigger it yourself with the transaction, and this would basically switch to is not if you want to, or you could switch it back. It was kind of like a playful way to use a smart contract as an artwork, without it being necessarily an NFT. And these are, I think, like, interesting and early examples. This was, for instance, around 2014 when she created it. These are like elements of crypto art which are kind of overlooked. Then there is an example here, I'm a Coin by Kevin Bosch, which is, one of the biggest names in the crypto art space. He created basically a token, which is conceptually, his token. And that is also not necessarily an NFT, because an NFT would be, non-fungible. It means it exists only once, while, a currency is a fungible, so it would be basically, per definition, not an NFT. And then also, I think, a little bit of controversy, but a lot of the rare pepes, which are, for instance, which exist in more than one edition, these are like fungible tokens, because each one of them, they are not numbered as editions. So they are basically all worth or considered to be the same. So they also don't fall into this NFT definition, but they are definitely crypto art. So let me give you a couple of examples of the areas here of digital art and blockchain related art. So as for elements which are blockchain related and digital. There were, for instance, cases where digital artwork was paid in Bitcoin, but it was not tokenized, or it was like a digital artwork which was kind of with a crypto relation or crypto theme, but it was not necessarily tokenized as well. So there are like gray zones or elements which are not crypto art, but they're still digital and blockchain related. Other than that, you have, of course, in number 5 here, the whole area of digital art, which is not crypto art. For instance, Cory Arcangel's famous Super Mario Cloud, where he kind of hard-coded the Nintendo Entertainment System game and basically removed everything but the clouds. Or here, Nunjan Pike, it's kind of his digital art installation. And then there is, also blockchain-related physical art, which is, not digital, but still has a very strong relationship to the blockchain element. And this is, for instance, a famous puzzle which was created by Coin Artist with the support of Ria Myers, and they created this Bitcoin puzzle which remained like unsolved for, I believe, 3-4 years, and had like Bitcoin embedded in it. If you would have solved the puzzle, it had like, I think, 50,000 back then worth of Bitcoin in it. So this is kind of just to show you, that this is kind of the overview where we could go. For me, define like blockchain related art if it falls like into 3 categories. So it could be either like the theme of, blockchain or Bitcoin could be basically explored. It could be used, the blockchain could be used as some sort of provenance without being tokenized. And then there's also, there's an element of using just cryptocurrencies as a payment form. It might seem not necessarily relevant, but, there's some famous artists, for instance, like Lincoln Townley, when he kind of created an auction and accepted Bitcoin, it made like news all over the world. So even just the use of cryptocurrencies in a traditional art world setting could be already, to some extent, an activism or like an interesting element to it. So I guess to kind of wrap it up, I guess, for me, it would be important that, your takeaway is that crypto art is much more than NFTs. We have been doing crypto art already since many years. There's a lot of history around it. There's a lot of elements which are important to people in this space. These elements of like decentralization, of making sure that artists are treated fairly, that artists are in the focus. So, it would be interesting for you to just kind of explore a little bit the past, see what has been done, and make sure that you kind of try to follow these tracks and pay attention to like things like secondary royalties. Make sure that if you choose to go with marketplaces, are these marketplaces really decentralized, or are they keeping basically everything on their servers? Are they keeping the art on their servers? So these are like all elements which should be important to you, and you should kind of ask the right questions about it. And that would be kind of a short introduction to putting crypto art in context. And Nicole, if there are any questions, I would be happy to talk about it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. This is awesome. I'm gonna wait for the group to ask questions if there are any. Feel free to unmute, or if you want to just write your questions on the chat, I can also read them out. I mean, I have a few maybe like questions or maybe a topic that I'd like to chat with you, Martin, about. It's like obviously you mentioned around the importance of royalties and like looking out for marketplaces that kind of speak to the themes of decentralization, like use, for example, IPFS or Piñata, or where do they store their metadata and their NFTs? What are some of the ways in which artists, especially who might not be familiar with all of these terms and aspects of the space, can look out for, and what are maybe resources that they can use?
I mean, a good place is always to ask other artists, who have been a little bit longer in the space, and just say them, hey, you are, for instance, on this marketplace. Can you tell me about it? Or is there something I should know? Typically, all of the marketplaces have some sort of Discord or Twitter account where you could ask your questions. Just join their Discord, browse a little bit, and ask your questions there. There's a lot of people who have probably the same questions, or have similar interests. So that would be a good place to kind of lurk a little bit around, learn about it, see who else is there, what are they doing, and yeah, I mean, that would be, I guess, how I would kind of evaluate. I would definitely check out, like, I find artists' royalties are really crucial, because this is the big game changer for me personally, when it comes to crypto art. So marketplaces which do not necessarily prominently show what their secondary royalties are, and they would not be answering, or not being able to tell me that, I would kind of stay away from, because, obviously these might be something they would consider later on, but, I think we are here at a time where this should be part of your initial thoughts, and people who consider that as an afterthought, they are not necessarily the people you want to work with in the first place.
I have a follow-up question, and
Sure.
Go for it. Did anybody unmute? Sorry. Okay. You mentioned like royalties, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how that came about, when how were royalties first enforced and talked about, like, in the space, because I know it was something that the artist brought up, right?
Yes. So it started basically that Super Rare back then, as one of the first and largest marketplaces, had their artist royalties, which was around at 5%, and they decided to reduce that royalty, I think, to 2 or 3%, in order to make sure that secondary sales still happen on the platform, and not like on OpenSea or like between collectors themselves, to kind of skip this royalty. And that created kind of like a really uproar among artists, right? Because this was like, hey, this is something which we really want, and which is really important to us. So there were a couple of tweets by Matt Kane, and then Lawrence. Oh, now I forgot his last name. Lauren Lee, I think. Lawrence Lee. And who's an older artist who's doing art like since decades, and who basically said like, look, like, I've been doing art since, like, let's say 50 or 60 years. He's in his 70s, Lawrence Lee. And this is something which really makes me excited, because I am now at an age of like 70 or whatever, and I still have to paint despite having sold tens of thousands of paintings. So this is something which is very, very important to me. So out of these kind of Twitter conversations, a few artists created some sort of like a loose group, and they kind of, started to research, okay, where does art royalties come from? Why is it so important for artists? Why is it nothing, what isn't something which is not established across countries because of legislations, because of other barriers, and why is this like a great opportunity? So they started to promote active royalties, and within 3 months, this kind of became a little movement and got a lot of momentum. That a lot of collectors joined basically this request, and then within 3 months, basically all platforms across implemented a 10% standard secondary royalty fee, which is, you know, something which is remarkable given that it came really from, you know, from artists, and that it gained so much momentum. And I think Lawrence Lee was like a great spokesperson for this movement, you know, as somebody who has been in the arts for so many years and really could not basically retire because, you know, even though his paintings were selling in the secondary market for a lot of money, he never saw a dime out of that. So I think, you know, it was like a very grassroots movement, which for the right reason gained a lot of momentum. And I think this is why it's also something which is important, and we don't want to, you know, in this phase in which we are, where things are moving fast, which we don't want it to go away and everybody to be aware of.
Awesome. I think we have a question from Mr. Ritchie as well. Rasco, he's saying, don't know if it's the right question, if the question is right, sorry, but what mechanisms on the blockchain or mechanisms in general do you think can be developed to protect art we make? I've already had several people mint my art on OpenSea and Rarible, and I was just lucky to be informed by it by other artists in the space. So I guess a lot of other artists have this issue too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in general, it's all about artists looking out for each other. I mean, this you know, this happens in this digital space. It happens in the physical space. There is not necessarily per se a solution handy. We have seen, you know, already in 2018, people minting other people's work, and this is something which was not necessarily solved yet. As the space grows, you know, it's something which is just, I guess it gets more transparency and more people are aware of it, and it's easier to kind of track it back. And especially if you're like, you know, part of the community, you know, if you engage with other artists, people will know your style, and this is how we used to watch out for each other, and this is how we still do it. But I think as of now, I haven't seen really some sort of solution to this problem yet. Will it come down the road? Maybe, but you know, in this whole idea, you know, it is kind of still a semi-anonymous place, so it is kind of hard. That's why, you know, these are the issues why many of the platforms implemented a process in which you have to identify if in which they want to know that you're really the creator, which is, you know, which might seem at first kind of tedious and not necessarily necessary, but it is basically for them to make sure that, you know, the artwork you offer on their website, that you are really the artist.
Yeah, great question and a really good point, because it definitely happens a lot. There's another question from Christian who says, I'm at work, but I wanted to know what marketplaces are the most decentralized in your opinion, as I'm currently on Rarible and got on Foundation recently.
I guess I would say most of the, like, there's a lot of platforms which are kind of exploring getting more and more decentralized. You know, you have, for instance, now Super Rare, which implemented their governance token, the Rare token, where basically they kind of shift the decision making of who is going to be allowed into the platform to the artists. I think that is something which Rarible wanted to do. I don't know to which extent that really did, but I think, you know, we can say that in general, there's two types of marketplaces. You know, you have like the curated marketplaces. So these are marketplaces which usually have some sort of like verification process. They want to make sure you are the artist. They want to make sure, they kind of curate the artists too. That means, do you fit the style and whatever. And they might be, if you go for the decentralization aspect per se, they might be a little bit harder to get in, but it doesn't necessarily mean they are more or less decentralized, especially since they're moving towards models where artists are part of the decision making, who is part of it. Foundation had the good idea that they would basically start this invite system where artists could invite other artists, but I think that got very quickly out of hand, where it became almost like a commodity where people were like trading these invites. So I don't think we have really found the holy grail yet, because this is still a nascent space. We are still developing as we go, but definitely, I would kind of look at the overall picture. Is this like a marketplace which, when it creates token, are these tokens really on the platform, or are there already like, tokens which are on the blockchain? Are the information stored? Can they be freely traded? Are they like basically, if you buy an artwork, is this artwork in your wallet, or does it still remain on the platform and you have to get it out in a cumbersome process or stuff like that? These would be like elements where I would kind of try to see, is it decentralized or not? Because, technically wise, if you mint an artwork and it ends up in your wallet, or it ends up being minted as it is bought, but it's transferred right away, these are like the elements of decentralizations which really are important. So elements where you have like, that it doesn't leave necessarily the platform, that would be like elements which would, for me, categorize it like as less decentralized.
Another question from Icaro, which says, "Hi Martin, thank you for the presentation and for sharing your knowledge with us. I'd like to answer, how do you see this movement from really traditional art institutions coming to the crypto space, by like Christie's and Sotheby's?"
I personally think they're not necessarily here because they're interested in what we are doing, right? They're not here because they think, oh, this is like a movement which is empowering artists, or this is movement which gives especially emerging artists an access to the art world. I believe, many of these, traditional art institutions are here because there's a lot of money to be made. And you see that as they, in the first auctions they made, it was like, it didn't accept even crypto. The bids are still not transparent, so they're not necessarily in for the concept, they're in to make money. Now it is, and this is something which is also worth mentioning, is it's not that they're like entirely blind of it, right? Because a lot of people are pushing for that. So we saw now, these auction houses also accepting crypto, and I believe now also starting to kind of show who bid and how much they bid. So I guess while they're not necessarily started out that way, we're kind of through this movement and through the attention, we do have a lot of say in where it is going, and we have to make sure we use this say and power to push these institutions also in the direction so that they pay attention to the right things. But in general, I'm kind of excited, not necessarily about the auction houses, but I am excited that, digital art stops being kind of the pariah of the art world, and a lot of, traditional and institutional partners like museums, like collections, that they start looking more at digital art. And I think, even though it starts with NFTs, I think, this overall attention is carrying off, or is carrying the entire digital art place into the focus as it is, becoming more and more relevant. So in that regard, I do feel good about it, that, we are getting traditional people into this crypto space.
Great answer. Totally agree. I'm just waiting because a few people are typing, so I'm guessing there's a few more questions. Also, if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, like feel free. I know maybe some of you are like at work or doing other things and might not be able to unmute. Okay, in the meantime, whilst we wait, I might ask another question from my side. So I guess like what I wanted to, okay, so sorry. First, I'll go with Garrison's question. So I don't know if there's any truth to this, but I saw a video about collectors circumventing the royalties process by gifting art, but then accepting payment through back channels. Is this a real problem? If so, how can the artists protect themselves against this? Actually, I think on this, Martin, I don't know if you saw it as well, but I saw a tweet yesterday from Bard Lanson about this. Maybe it's the same thing that Garrison is mentioning, but I think it happened to him as well.
Yeah, I think it is definitely still a problem, but I think it is not necessarily a widespread problem because as people are getting, let's say, more attention and artworks are getting more attention, I think people start also getting a reputation as a collector. And if you want to be long in this space and you want to be active in the space, if you're trying to kind of play the system, this will backfire on you. If it shows, this is the beauty about the spaces, right? Everything is transparent, and if you see that artworks are transferred and then there's a payment going to this address which is in an amount which would make maybe equate the list price or something, these are things which over time will become transparent, and people's reputations will be depending on that. Does it happen? Sure. Is it the norm? I would say no. You have to also understand that a lot of people are new, right? So they don't know necessarily what is happening. So, for instance, one of the issues which we are facing, that, for instance, OpenSea, they do not necessarily respect the royalties of the original marketplace contract. So if people list an artwork they bought, for instance, on, let's say, Maker's Place, and they sell it on OpenSea, then there's no secondary royalties to the creator on Maker's Place. And this is something which is not necessarily always done, in order to circumvent it, but it's, I think, often done because people don't know about it. So I would always suggest, if you have somebody who is interested in your art in a secondary place, or if you want to do it, always try to purchase it or refer the buyer to stay on the original marketplace the artwork was created, because that way you can make sure that everybody is getting their fair share.
And also, if I can add to it, it's like, don't be afraid to mention this to collectors and just kind of stand your ground when like talking to certain like collectors or anybody who's interested in your work, because you have like a base to say, like, my artwork is on Foundation, it's on Rarible, it's on OpenSea, or wherever you're minting on, and I would like for the payment, the transfer, the sale, everything to happen like on the chain. That's the whole point of trading on the blockchain, right? And like minting and tokenizing. So it protects you, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be done any other way.
Absolutely. And I think there's also like a best practice for artists. If you sell a piece through a platform where it does not enforce the original smart contract and it does not give the artist you collected the royalty, do the right thing. Send the artist your share of a royalty. If you sold that artwork for, let's say, 1 ETH, give them the 0.1 ETH. It will go a long way. It's make it public that you transferred the royalties, raise awareness in the space. People will appreciate it a lot, and it will raise awareness to the problem. And I think, we should lead by example.
Yeah, exactly. We have a question from Hyper Icon, which says, "Hi Martin, in your perspective, does the cypherpunk idea still exist in the community around crypto art?"
I believe it does for like the older crypto artists, which really went through a lot of things, which saw where it's coming from. I think it is our responsibility to make sure that we communicate these values, that it still remains in this community, because that's something which I'm just passionate about, that we kind of promote it, that we make sure, the new artists also learn about it, also hear about it, because it is, it is important. We're trying here not to recreate something which is defunct. We're trying to make something which is better. And I think a lot of the elements from the cypherpunk movement are still important and are still part of the crypto community. But as the space is growing fast, there's not necessarily, the resources to be aware of all of these things. So it's up to us to kind of, as we are bringing in people, as we are talking with people, to make sure we also promote these ideas and values, that they remain in the community. This is the problem of general growth, I think. If the growth is too fast, the focus kind of dilutes. People, platforms are focused on growth, artists are focused to getting onboarded as fast as possible to be part of it. But I think, and this is, where this residency is great, we have the chance here to make sure that you are aware of it, and you kind of know where to look at and what to pay attention to.
Definitely. I'm trying to post the cypherpunk manifesto, but for some reason the website is like down, or one of the website that I usually go to, which has the one that I always look at, it's not working. So but it's definitely like I love to read it, to be honest. I think it's like something that I recommend everybody to go and like read, even like the Bitcoin like white paper, a lot of like Vitalik's interviews. Like he does I'm gonna post it now. He has a great podcast he did once, which was very interesting and inspiring to me, around like how he built Ethereum to like fund public goods and services, which I think is really interesting. So yeah.
I'm sorry, Nicole. Are you talking about the Cypherpunk Manifesto by Eric Hughes, or is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you another question, then I'll wait for any other questions that get posted, or if anybody wants to unmute. But because like obviously you've been around a long time, like 2018 till now, so you've seen, I guess, a lot of like cycles and market growths, and then kind of like ups and downs, let's say. I guess this is like unprecedented. Like this year, obviously, there's like an unprecedented growth and, mainstream, etc. But what are some of the, the ways that you, or some of the, I guess, some tips, or like any kind of things that like you've learned throughout these 3 and so years, like working within a space that is essentially highly correlated to crypto markets?
Yeah. So I guess, one of the concepts that's a little bit harder to get your head around is basically this fluctuation Nicole just mentioned, that, basically whatever you sold it for could be worth less or more an hour later. And I think what is important to see is that sometimes you have to write it out. An ETH is an ETH. This is something which a lot of people who are longer in the space understand. They're not necessarily looking at the current dollar value of it, but they kind of understand, that it goes up and down. So if I price it in this, I'm not going to adjust my pricing every week just in order to match a dollar equivalent, because it's impossible. You're going to end up just maintaining and paying gas fees or whatever to kind of accommodate something which doesn't need to be accommodated. I think something which is important, and a lot of people see, is consistency, so be consistent with your ideas and your pricings. Like, don't because you sold 2 or 3, now double your prices. This is something which a lot of people will not appreciate. You can have, over the time, there can be an upward trend if your artwork is collected, if it gets popular, but like, don't do these jumps too hard, because it will kind of deter a lot of artists. But at the same time, don't undervalue yourself. Like, there's artwork I have, on marketplaces, which was there for 2 years and nobody was buying it. But then the right buyer came, they saw it, he saw that it's the piece speaks to him, and he paid the price. So I guess you have to find of your kind of sweet spot between, what is pricing. I think that alone is a big topic to talk about. But yeah, I think, it's important to make sure that it's consistent. And I, for instance, used editions to kind of make my artwork accessible to a wider group. So for instance, if I sell one-on-one originals, I can have that at a little bit higher price point, but I would try to have always a few editions around, which would allow me to, make my art accessible for people who are not able to spend that much ETH on an artwork.
Great tips. Are there any other questions or thoughts? I think one thing, Martin, what you just mentioned around like artworks kind of selling after like a couple of years is something that Jason was mentioning last week as well. Like with Sarah Zucker, for example, her art, and she mentioned it in one of the classes we did last time as well to the residents herself, saying that her work just sat on Super Rare for a long time, and until like somebody, which in this case was Jason, came along and just bought her work, talked about what she was doing, and that kind of made her well known in the space. But yeah, it's a really important point, I think, because sometimes like, especially maybe coming into the space and like seeing all of these artists like selling for like enormous amounts, you almost like feel pressured that if you're not selling immediately or as you would like to, then there's something wrong, right?
Yeah. And I think one thing to consider is, this is a great opportunity for artists, but it is not magic, right? So there's just not a recipe now that everybody is going to sell instantly. It's still about your art. It's still about you as an artist. It's still about your promotion and your story, right? Just because you have your artwork on a marketplace doesn't mean it will sell. So it will still require work. It will still require you to promote your art. It will still require you to tell your story so people know that your art is there, because it's not, or it rarely is the case that people say like, oh, I like this art, I'd buy it right away.
Absolutely. Any more questions?
Yeah. So the part of the presentation you saw today, I'm still finishing up a write-up, so it will be, later on accessible on my blog. So with a little bit of more examples, so you can basically, go back through it and read through it. And if there's something, if you're interested in the history of CryptoArt, I might just post the link here in the chat. It's kind of the timeline I try to maintain which kind of documents some of the milestones. There's like over 300 milestones by now. I try to add a few every week. And it's just interesting to see, how much exciting and interesting creators there have been already since so many years, and what was done before. Because in my cases, I was working for months on an artwork, I was exhibiting it, and I was very happy about it. But I discovered that another artist did that a few years before me in a different way. So it's sometimes also good to just see what is around. Maybe it inspires you, and also it helps you to understand in which direction it can go, because some of the artists are really thinking in wide terms and wide ideas.
You also have a question from Gabrielle now that says, thank you, Martin, for the presentation. I want to know your point of view on the blockchain technologies being used by governments. How do you see the future of it on the everyday life? Positive, negative?
So I believe, that I read quite a bit about the technology behind it. And I believe it will change a lot of aspects of our life without necessarily us being aware of it anymore. Because just the idea that, having this information publicly, in a way that it can no longer be changed and encrypted, will allow for a lot of, beneficial ways to maintain data in general. Let's say, for instance, there was an example where somewhere in Latin America there was a fire, and then the borders of, for instance, a village, they, the office where it was maintained, how big and where the properties are, that was burned. And then after the fire, people were trying to bribe, the officials to redefine these borders. So imagine all this information is stored on the blockchain, where it can be retrieved, from anybody, and can be basically reconstructed. Or another element is, for instance, what about elections? What if basically your vote is registered on the blockchain, so it can be verified that everybody voted once and how many people voted, and is really the person who's voting the person he is. There's elements where you can say, hey, this idea of smart contracts is great for charities. You can have, for instance, say, I want to donate $100 to the Red Cross, but I want to limit these $100 that it can only be spent on water, let's say. So now if the charity is somewhere like in, let's say, it would be like in a developing country, and they would say, hey, I'm now in a grocery store and I'm going to spend this $100, and I have, let's say, water for $50, and I have like other things. So this smart contract would check and say, hey, there's only $50 worth of water. So out of your donation, only 50% can be used for this transaction. There's a lot of elements where there's going to be applications in our world and future. And it's going to affect our lives. But it's going to be a gradual transition. Now, I guess the technology itself will not necessarily fix governments have as issues in general. That is something which is important to consider as well. And it will be, that's why I think it's important for us to educate about this technology and make sure a lot of people understand it, that we can kind of guide or influence the way the governments are using it. Because, the best technology is nothing if it is not used the right way or in the interest of the people. My pleasure.
Awesome. I can see a few people typing. I'm just going to wait to see if there's any more questions. And then if there's not, we can wrap it up. I'm also going to post your Twitter just in case, so people know how to find you as well. And the link to your timeline and history of CryptoArt website.
Thanks.
Okay, I think Garrison is typing. I don't know if you have a question or if you want to unmute. Let's see.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I just I just asked it, but I had muted myself on my microphone, and so I'll ask it again. Talking about the ideas of the history of crypto art, what are your ideas and suggestions on the conservation of it? I know there's things like Pinata and whatnot. I actually started to use that myself, but in general, do you think that there would be more like larger bodies more focused on the conservation?
I believe so. And I also I have a very, I have a very sober idea of view on conservation. I do believe, that right now we are still in a kind of an evolutionary state. For me, the current token standards are, one step in an evolution like the CD or the DVD was. That means that for me, it could be very possible that, in a few years from now, nobody is using ERC 721 anymore. Nobody is using, Counterparty or whatever, because we will move on to a standard which will incorporate the conservation better. Now, I think, and this is where I'm kind of can speak as a collector as well, is I want to make sure that I, for instance, collect art or artworks which I find relevant, right? Because or artists which demonstrate that they have like long-term intentions, because then I have, a higher chance or they have a bigger interest that their art is preserved, other than just me trying to take care of this conservation. So, I think it is definitely an area which is still in development, which is still, a lot of people are not aware that, which is surprising, but like that with the token, the file is not necessarily in the token, right? It's just the reference to the file. It is not the file itself, which, brings up a whole other discussion. Is the file part of the artwork or not? Or is it more conceptual? But I think, yes, definitely, I think as somebody who creates art, you have to make sure you take good care of conservation. You have to make sure you take care of it for the art you collect. And, for instance, for myself, if there would be a new token standard, every of my collectors who can demonstrate that he still owns the files, I would be happy to merge an artwork to the next standard. And I think, we have to just be aware that, this is not the end. This is an evolution. It is a necessary step, because we would have never arrived at the DVD without the cassette. So it is a necessary step, but it does not necessarily mean that this is the end. It still might develop. It still might change. We have to do the best we can in order to make and preserve. Yeah, I guess that would be my take on it. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, totally. It brings me on to actually think about something myself, because of this idea about conservation. And I actually think that things should get lost over time. Not everything, but some.
Mhm.
I think we should conserve some things which are important. But if everything we do gets kept, it can lead to a kind of idea of a hoarding mentality of a civilization in a way. And
Mhm.
and since like in the last like maybe 10 or 20 years, we've got like this whole the digital artwork. There's a lot of production. There's a lot of servers. There's a lot of people producing things. Maybe one weird outcome could be that that too many people are minting on the blockchain, as it were, and it's just an exponential growth into like saving all these things. You know, it's quite a weird thing to think about. Like with 7 billion people on the planet, with a certain percentage of them all making art and keeping everything on these servers in like which are actually tokenized, it could actually lead to a very strange problem like in the future.
Yeah, and I think I think that NFTs beyond art will be part of a lot of things. Maybe your rights will be NFTs. Maybe your access to certain things will be NFTs. So the component of NFTs will just grow and grow and grow in our daily life. So, and that's, I think, it's the same thing with traditional art for me. If there's hundreds of thousands of paintings and artworks created every year, but not everything will make the ages, right? A lot of things might get forgotten, might get lost, and it is the responsibility of curators, it is the responsibility of institutions, of artists, to make sure that things which should or are considered relevant or are considered important to them, that they persist the time. And I think a lot of collectibles projects we see right now, I don't think many of them might make it in future, because there's going to be just so many that there might be some sort of consolidation, and people think, hey, what out of all these hundreds and thousands of projects, what is really like, things which are relevant, what are important? But I don't think all of them will be.
Sorry, I was on mute. We have one last, one question from Garrison, which says, forgive the conspiracy theorishness of this question. The CIA was directly involved in the abstract expressionist movement in the 40s and 50s as a way to counter the ideals of communism. Satoshi Nakamoto means Central Intelligence in Japanese. China is basically banning crypto. What do you make of this, conspiracy or not? Is there a credence to it? Sorry for the long-windedness.
Yeah, I guess I have no not enough knowledge to make any links to the abstract expressionist movement and the CIA. I guess the only part which I can really speak to is China banning crypto for the 50th time. For me, it's just an example of why we're trying to explore this idea of a decentralized network, because with China having now the first time, I guess the most persuasive attempt to ban crypto, we saw that the network, this idea that people across the world, across different countries, are maintaining this network, it basically can sustain like large world players. Banning it will basically not shut down the network. And I think this is something which I found exciting to see, that yes, the hash rate went down, but the network adjusted. The network did not fail. The network did not have a break. The network just continued. And I think, that showed for me that itself as a concept, there is definitely something there which is worth continuing, which is conceptually interesting, which is conceptually valuable. And the idea of being tamper-proofed and being, able to sustain bans of countries, it was basically proven right.
Nice question. And nice answer. Okay, super. If we don't have anything else, Martin, thank you so much. It was great to hear from you. I'm so glad that this time around we got to do it.
Yeah, I was happy that it worked out.
Yeah, and I left for everybody, obviously, like the class is recorded, so we'll share the recording afterwards. But I left the Martin's Twitter as well, so if you want to like reach out or anything, like follow Martin. He updates his timeline on a daily basis, right, Martin? At least.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Thank you so much.
All right, my pleasure. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Good luck with this, with your endeavor to enter the space. I'm excited, that you're interested in taking the time to learn more about it, learn more about the history, and be well equipped when you enter the space and having like some sort of well-rounded profile and having touched on a lot of things.
Thank you, Martin.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Martin.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Ciao.